Well, Joe Biden, the president who some seem to think is too old to be president, flew across the Atlantic Ocean 4 times in a week. First to France to attend the ceremonies commemorating D-Day, and then back to Washington, then back across the Atlantic to Italy for the all-important G7 meeting. And then the longest leg of his flight schedule was from Europe back across the Atlantic, this time all the way across the country to Los Angeles, where on Saturday night, when I would have been prohibitively jet-lagged to even speak, President Biden, in an appearance with his most important friend in politics, President Barack Obama, laid out the stakes in this presidential election.
Institutions matter. And this president, what he did on January the 6th, here he's saying now, he said if he doesn't win, there'll be a bloodbath. It's outrageous what he's talking about.
And if Donald Trump does win the Electoral College, he has promised pardons and immediate releases from prison for all of the people who violently attacked the Capitol for Donald Trump on January 6, 2021, to try to overturn the presidential election. The greatest single crime ever committed against democracy in American history now has the full and open public support of one of our presidential candidates who just happens to also be a criminal defendant accused of being the lead conspirator in that crime against American democracy leading up to and on January 6th. On Saturday night, President Biden heightened the stakes in the election by pointing out something we all should have seen as obvious before President Biden said it, which is that if Donald Trump wins the Electoral College again, he'll be in a position to immediately appoint at least 2 extreme Republican members of the Supreme Court who will be able to extend the life of the Trump court for another 40 years.
These threats to abortion rights, to women's rights, even to birth control and IVF are not in our liberal imaginations anymore. They're very real. And these decisions, these very personal, intimate decisions are now being made by 9 unelected judges, one of whom flies his flag upside down. The other one of the others drives around in a $267,000 gift on vacations. And I think we are all wondering, what can we do about this?
Elect me. Again, I'll tell you why. No, I'm not just saying. The next president is likely to have 2 new Supreme Court nominees. 2 more. 2 more. He's already appointed 2 that have been very negative in terms of the rights of individuals. The idea that if he's reelected, he's going to appoint 2 more flying flags upside down is really, I really mean it. Could
this be the scariest part of all of it?
Well, I think it is one of the scariest parts of it. Look, the Supreme Court has never been as out of kilter as it is today. I mean, never. I taught constitutional law for 9 years. This guy knows more about it than most. Look, the fact of the matter is that this has never been a court that's been this far out of step. And by the way, when we said after the decision that overruled Roe v. Wade, the Dobbs decision, you had Clarence Thomas talking about the fact that there are going to be other things we should reconsider, including in vitro fertilization, including contraception, including all these things. And they're going. And by the way, gay rights. But by the way, not on my watch. Not on my watch.
Here's the outline of the 2-judge deal Joe Biden was just talking about. Clarence Thomas is 75 years old. He doesn't look especially healthy. He doesn't look like he likes his job. He has already been identified as the most corrupt Supreme Court justice in history, given that no Supreme Court justice in history has ever actually been accused of a crime. Clarence Thomas violates ethical standards and financial disclosure rules at an unprecedented level that makes him the Supreme Court justice who has financially exploited his position as a Supreme Court justice more than any other justice in history, and no one else is even close. How much money would it take to get 75-year-old Clarence Thomas to resign from the Supreme Court so that Donald Trump could replace him with 43-year-old Judge Aileen Mercedes Cannon, who could serve 40 years on the United States Supreme Court after she dismisses the charges against Donald Trump in the criminal case that Jack Smith has brought against Donald Trump for violations of the Espionage Act, which Judge Cannon would absolutely do as soon as possible if Donald Trump won the Electoral College. Donald Trump wouldn't even have to ask her to do that. Clarence Thomas won't just get a brand new motorhome for resigning from the Supreme Court. They'll give him a private jet. They'll give him whatever it takes. Clarence Thomas will live the life of an ultra-rich man for the rest of his life, the life he's always wanted to live, the rich man's life. And then there's 74-year-old Samuel Alito, who would be similarly convinced with similar financial inducements to leave the Supreme Court so that he too could be replaced by a 40-year-old Republican right-wing extremist who would extend the Trump court's rule another 40 years. Yes, your vote means possibly 40 more years control of the Supreme Court. Samuel Alito's wife would then be free after her husband left the court to yell anything she wants at her neighbors, but she might then be rich enough to live in a gated community that would lock her off from any exposure to anyone other than extremist Trump Republicans who share Mrs. Alito's views of flags, including her publicly expressed utter hatred of gay pride flags. That is a very easy two-judge deal for Donald Trump and rich Republicans to execute. At the event on Saturday, President Obama said this.
The power of the Supreme Court is determined by appointments. It is determined by elections. And so, what we're seeing now is a byproduct of, in 2016, there were a whole bunch of folks who, for whatever reason, sat out. They said, well, we're not enthusiastic enough. We're not feeling inspired enough. Why bother? And hopefully we have learned our lesson, because these elections matter in very concrete ways, and we're now seeing how much it matters when it comes to the Supreme Court.
Not inspired enough. One of the conditions that the Biden-Harris campaign knows they are facing is some degree of what President Obama was just talking about, some degree of voter apathy, which actually exists because Joe Biden has brought sanity back to the presidency. Some voters don't apparently remember how bad it was under the Trump presidency. And because of the normalcy of the Biden presidency, some of those voters have not had much reason to pay much attention to the actual accomplishments of the Biden presidency. When President Obama gets out on the campaign trail, this is what those voters will be hearing from him.
I've talked about this before. At its best, the presidency is a relay race, right? You take the baton and you run the race, and so we get the Affordable Care Act started. But we knew at the time that even though 20 million people were getting health insurance from it who didn't have it before, there were still some people who were having trouble affording it because we couldn't fund all the subsidies that a lot of people needed. Joe comes in, boosts some of the subsidies. That means millions more people are able to access health care that's affordable, and they can have some security. On climate change, we fund clean energy at record levels. When we first came into office, Joe and I together, we move forward in terms of making sure that fuel efficiency standards on cars have changed. We get the Paris Accords done, but that's not enough to deal with the size and scope of the challenges that we face. Joe comes in, makes historic investments in clean energy. So I take great pride in what the Biden administration has accomplished, and it's a reminder that we don't have to just vote against something in this election. We have somebody to worry about, and there's a whole agenda that we should be concerned about. But we can take pride in affirming the extraordinary work that Joe has done, and we want to make sure that we build on that and then pass it on to the next president, rather than have a president who wants to reverse the progress that has been made.
A group of more than 20 women sued the state of Texas after they were denied abortion services even when their lives were at risk because of pregnancy. The Texas Supreme Court rejected the lawsuit and refused to clarify the so-called exception to the Texas law's provision that appears to authorize only abortions necessary to save the life of the mother. Lauren Miller was one of the women who sued Texas.
I like all my doctors, I like nurses, et cetera. In Texas, I felt for them that their hands are tied in what they can do. And the team in Colorado was incredible. They were trying to do everything from help me just know what was going to happen with the procedure to following up afterwards with mental health resources, support groups for others who have been through my situation and who are now going back to these banned states where we are just silenced and we're erased.
And when did you come home to Texas?
So it's a bit shocking for a 15-minute procedure that could have been done 3 miles from my house. It took several $1,000s in 3 days. And the entire time we were in Colorado, we had clear blue skies, sun shining, and it was amazing. We touched down in Dallas again, and it was night. And it just felt once again, blackness had come over us. And we didn't tell anybody what had happened. We didn't tell anybody what we had done because we were so scared.
Joining us now is Lauren Miller, who, thank you very much for joining us tonight. I can imagine what it was like to go through what you went through, and then to go through that day of testifying to the Senate Judiciary Committee. How did it feel to not have the support or even the acknowledgement of your Texas senators? Either one of them could have been there at that hearing.
Well, thanks for having me here tonight, Lawrence. And it was pretty shocking that neither of them acknowledged me at all. That Senator Cruz, who is on that subcommittee, couldn't even be bothered to show up. He either simply was too much of a coward to face the situation that he had forced me into, or he just didn't care. And neither of that is really a great recipe for a representative in Congress. And it was really just shocking and very disappointing.
I just want to clarify some points of your story for the audience, because I know they're wondering. You were pregnant with twins. The abortion was for one of that part of the pregnancy. And how did the rest of the pregnancy go?
Correct. So I had what is called a single fetal reduction, which is just an abortion of one twin. And it was remarkable. I had been so sick from that point. I didn't reach my pre-pregnancy weight until I was in the 7th month of pregnancy because I'd been just so ill, couldn't eat anything. But I mean, hours after I had my abortion, I could eat dinner. And the rest of the pregnancy was fortunately very unremarkable. It was very normal. And I had a happy, healthy son at the end of it.
It is so stunning to me that we talk about life of the mother. One of the things that no one's ever referred to as we talk about this publicly until you brought it to our attention is, what about the life of the twin? What about the life of the other potential baby who during the pregnancy is threatened by the other.
Exactly. And there's a situation that had not been contemplated because, in a sense, it didn't really matter because the exceptions, I don't think, were ever intended to work. They were just there to be a lie that could be repeated often enough to be believable by virtue of repetition. And if anti-abortion politicians, judges, et cetera, continued to repeat it, then they could get people to vote against their best interest and for their own dehumanization.
You know, from the start, after Roe was overturned, and after the states started enacting these laws, some of which with so-called exceptions, I have not referred to their exceptions because I simply refer to them as abortion bans when discussing them here, because you're going to have to prove to me that there are exceptions. You're going to have to prove to me that the exceptions actually work. And I was just doing that with a kind of instinctive understanding about the way laws are executed without even knowing that your story and others were going to be coming along to confirm, as you say, there is functionally no exception in Texas.
That's correct. And in our lawsuit, we had a very modest ask. It was just, how dead do we have to be? And we couldn't even get that kind of clarity from the Texas Supreme Court. And I remember when I first read that ruling from them a few weeks back now, and I immediately had to go back and reread it because I felt I had missed something. And what I saw upon rereading it, what I had missed was us. We just weren't there. We had been completely erased. They didn't even refer to us as the plaintiffs. They referred to our lawyers instead, which is such an absurd situation. And that's the reality, is these exceptions are not supposed to exist. And if they could just erase us entirely, then they could try and distract from the fact that these exceptions aren't real.
Are there support groups now in Texas trying to help women who financially on their own don't have the capacity to make it to Colorado or to make it to somewhere where they can get help?
There are, and there's networks that are trying to help people to get out of state. The unfortunate reality is we shouldn't have to have any of these. We should not just go back to Roe, we should have national protection for abortion, because as cases like mine show, this is healthcare. And there are a lot of reasons to get an abortion. Everyone is fine, but there may be situations where it is really necessary. Regardless of what you want, it may be something that is necessary to save your life, or in a situation like mine, to protect a wanted pregnancy.
Well, this goes to the stakes in the presidential election and in the congressional elections. Republicans say they want to enact a national abortion ban, similar to Texas. Democrats say they want to enact into law, basically restore Roe versus Wade through law.
Yeah, the stakes of this election could not be higher. This is an election that is literally about our lives. This election is about the dehumanization of half of this country. And if Donald Trump, if these MAGA Republicans continue to have their way, there will be a national abortion ban. And there is no week where it's reasonable. I had my abortion at 15 weeks. If that proposed 15-week ban was in place, I would have had nowhere to turn. I would maybe not be here, but my son definitely would not be here.
Lauren Miller, thank you very much for sharing this important story. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me.